crap. Well, howdy, folks. I'd like to welcome you to What's in Tegan's Storage Locker, the show that dares to ask the question, what is in my storage locker? The answer today, as it will be every day from now until the heat death of the universe, is comic books. I got the damn things coming out of my ears. I don't know what else to tell you. So what we do here is I got lots of comics. If you see the opening sequence of the show, that's where they're from, although the storage unit is slightly more organized than it was at the time I took... Oh, hello. Thank you for joining us. Yes, well, I've been playing with him for about 45 minutes or so, trying to see if I can get him to calm down, but you know how that goes. He'll probably join us, and then the second episode I record this sitting, he'll probably be a little tired, and maybe he'll perk up at the end of it, because then it'll be getting towards the time of night when he starts to perk up. He's pretty predictable as far as that goes. Just a little mischief maker, and he's going to be 2 very soon. I have no idea when he was born, but they say, well, you know, cats usually grow out of having so much energy and mischief by the time before they're 2. Well, he's almost 2, and apparently the exception to that rule is if they're weaned too early, and he was definitely weaned too early. Through circumstances that I will never know, they are secret, known only to him. Anyway, don't mean to get talking about my cat. We're here to talk about comic books, although if you watch this show or listen to the podcast, you'll know he intrudes himself whether I want him or not. And you stay away from him. And he's really mean to his brother sometimes. One of these days for the show, we're going to get t-shirts that just say, stay off your brother. Anyway. Let's get going. Well, maybe we'll get through, 5 of these. Got a big stack here, more or less random. We got a lot to get through. I try not to be too repetitive from one show to the other. Let's start off with this issue of The Curse of Spawn. This is in the second half of the run. I think I made like 28 or 29 issues. I don't remember off the top of my head. I was definitely losing interest in Spawn at this point, but I bought every issue of this series because this was kind of better than Spawn, which is maybe not that much of a surprise because by the time this got going, Spawn was well past issue 50, I think, and you know, it had long since settled into the holding pattern of Spawn comics, which is that not a lot happens in Spawn. And that's kind of why this series was as successful as it was and as well remembered as it is by Spawn people, I think. I think it is. Because something actually happened. In every issue of this comic book, it was quite eventful, even though it was sort of an anthology. It was a character anthology, even though it kept the same characters. Every arc would focus on a different part of the Spawn universe. The first arc was a future Spawn, sort of... similar in some respects to what, the Tales of Witchblade book was doing. But later on, there was just arcs about different members of the Spawn supporting cast, and also the, exploring parts of the Spawn mythos that maybe they didn't really have a place for in the main book. Who was writing this? That was Alan McElroy. I don't know who that is. I know I recognize the name from him writing a bunch of Spawn. Now, what really stood out, and the reason why this book was as exciting as it was the art by this man here, Dwayne Turner. You never see his work anymore. That is a true shame, because he's one of the unsung greats of the 90s. He had all the style of the Image guys, all of the, he came up in Marvel in the late 80s, so he knew how to draw a comic, the nuts and bolts of it. He had a little bit of Todd McFarlane's, eye for detail. He could make flashy books that read like Jim Lee. He just was the whole package. And you know, yeah, there were a couple of reasons why maybe he didn't take off like he could have. Part of was that he really got behind, you know, they really pushed him for the Luke Cage revival in, I think, 91, just called Cage. And it just, you know, it just wasn't the time for that character. It wasn't the time for that book. I think it lasted maybe a year and a half. I want to say a year and a half. You know, respectable, but it just wasn't the time. Luke Cage didn't really do a lot in the 90s. There were years, I think, where he just didn't appear, or he appeared in something really bad, like the storyline where the Punisher was black for 3 issues. It's a thing. Look it up. It's not a good thing. So he wasn't part of the first couple waves of Image. And then finally he comes in because I think what I want to say is that Todd McFarlane loved this guy, thought he was great, and that's why he gave him his whole comic to play around with. And it worked. It was totally one of the nicest looking books on the stands. And, you know, it was a Spawn spinoff, so it maybe didn't get as much attention as it could have. Plus, this was, you know, already well into the late 90s. This was, I want to say, 98. So, you know, Spawn wasn't blazing up the charts at this time. Although Spawn has been able to support, you know, a spinoff or two for most of its existence. This is about when he started to expand because he didn't want to have another ongoing for the first, I don't know, 5 or so years of the book. And then he branched out and, you know, this spinoff, and eventually Sam and Twitch got their own book. And I think there was a follow-up series to this too. Anyway, like I said, this is about where my Spawn knowledge sort of drops off because towards the end of the decade, you know, stasis had really set in, so to speak. But this book was worth it throughout. There's a Kiss shirt. Todd was doing the Kiss comics at that point. Let's see here. I don't even have any clue what this is about. I'm guessing that's the Freak, right? Very creatively named. I want to say that was just a weird maniac killer dude who Spawn fought sometimes. Because a lot of his enemies were, you look at the Spawn Rogues gallery, it's like government goons, maniac killers, and government goons, maniac killers. Oh, and pawns of heaven or hell. So that's actually pretty, you know, diverse. Not a lot of, you know, costume masterminds. But you know, this is what Todd wanted. This is, you know, dark, grisly, lots of shadows on the page, but lots of detail work. Gruesome horror stuff. Basically what was working for the regular Spawn book, what had always worked for the regular Spawn book. Now, when I flip through Spawn in the stores, it has much more of an epic fantasy feel to it because, I mean, it's got like 30 years of continuity that it's just, you know, whoa, zombie Spawn? Oh, yeah, I don't remember this at all. I need to go, what I need to do next time I go up to the storage locker is actually pick out all my issues of this so I can do a real reread. Because I don't remember anything, especially in the later end of this book. But, yeah, this, one of the weird things about Image is that even the better artists sometimes struggled. And I don't know why, if it was a lack of editors or, you know, art directors. They didn't have a bullpen bulletin, or they didn't have a bullpen following along after them to, you know, fix if they, you know, got the foreshortening wonky in a panel. And, you know, artists complain about that stuff sometimes. But that wasn't the way with Dwayne Turner. He didn't stop drawing backgrounds, and he didn't lose anything in his, you know, panel-to-panel storytelling either. You know, the first run of this book, this is not so much here, but the first like arc at least is really filled with extraordinarily detailed backgrounds and scenery. Oh, Todd McFarlane invades New York. What's this? Oh, it's for the second season of Spawn. Man, you want to talk about something? I had the VHS. I had a VHS with the first season of Spawn recorded onto it, and I think I loaned that thing out to more people than I ever. I loaned out a fair amount of comics when I was a kid, but nobody wanted to see anything as much as the VHS tape of that, which should tell you about the era. No, there's one of the Terry Fitzgerald. Terry Fitzgerald was, the name of a guy in Spawn, but he was also one of Todd's best friend, I think, who actually might still run his business, I don't know, but seemed to do a pretty good job about it, which you can't say for all the family members who were shanghaied into the image experiment, or family members and hangers-on, so to speak. He was doing the Spawn, the X-Files toys here. And, if you think about it, that's the kind of thing that put his name on the map, because no one before Todd would probably have thought that, to look at the X-Files and say, oh, yeah, Mulder and Scully, action figures. But if I recall, they did pretty well. End cap, so I guess this was a advertising editorial about the production of the toys. The toys always look good, even when I was starting to get detached from Spawn. I remember I bought a couple of the dragons that he did. One of those dragons, my mom had it on her desk until the day she died. Loved his dragons. I mean, that's a nice looking toy. I can't say it isn't. You're doing better off than I if you have the money to follow him, though. And he did. There you go. There's your Kiss toys. Still a lot of money to be made on Kiss in the 90s. They were going through the nostalgia circuit just like everyone else. And he's big, he's bad, he's back. Man, they really pushed it, and people loved it. People love that show. And now if you go back and look at it, it looks kind of funny because, we've had generations of, like anime and even, American adult animation now. Invincible's pretty popular. So it's kind of primitive in some ways, but also very much a document of its time in other ways. Oh, what's this? This is interesting. The official Marvel Index to the X-Men #2. Now, this is actually the second Marvel Index series. They first did a series of indexes in the 80s. I only have a couple of those. Whereas I did pick up the 90s ones because, these were, they made a big push for them. And they had nice covers. See, it's Brian Stelfree's number. Brian Stelfree can still draw like a house on fire. He did, he came back to, I think he did monthly comics for that run of Black Panther, and that was gorgeous stuff. No flies on him. And this book, really dry, really technical. This is what we had before we had, Wikipedia and the fandom wikis. It's just like appearances of team members. There you go, down the list. This is all the appearances of the X-Men between the end of their ongoing series and the Giant Size X-Men #1. So like 6 years of appearances. And, there were lots of people, especially I think Steve Englehart. And in hindsight, you look back at the historical record, it's kind of anomalous that Steve Englehart wasn't the one to do, to bring them back, because he wrote him into his Captain America. I want to say he did the Amazing Adventures with the Beast too. He was the guy who really kept the flame alive on that. But, they kept the characters enough in circulation, a few appearances a year, that, there was enough demand for them to come back in 75. Written by someone named Murray Ward with various production assistants. Tom Brevoort, editor. This is an early editing gig for Brevoort, in 94, because he'd only been, I think, an editor for a few years by then. And, this is the type of book that probably wrote itself to a degree, since, they had another writer who had his own assistants and reviewers. Very much the kind of fandom project that you can definitely see the the modern iterations, like I say, and like, you know, the people who update those fandom wikis and the I don't know if been a while since I spent a lot of time there, but it's still updated. The official handbook of the Marvel Universe Appendix website, which is absolutely invaluable for any character who isn't big enough to have their own fandom entry. I've gotten a lot of use out of it over the years for various sundry things. So yeah, starting off with issue 51, or issue 52 rather. Basically, what this does is it gives you credits, full credits for the whole story and the cover, everyone who appears in it, where these villains appear next, where all the characters appear next, which is nowadays you can go online and find, and of course to a lot of this information, nowadays you can find it with a stroke of a key, a keystroke. But back then, this was extraordinarily valuable information to have. Villain, Blastar. Blastar appears fairly often. You can look at this and see, oh, this is his most recent appearance was in Fantastic 463. And he didn't appear for a while. He didn't appear for another couple of years until Marvel Team Up 18. These are the Barry Smith, later Barry Windsor Smith issues. And they were also, this is when they were doing the later run of the early X-Men series, what I was trying to say. They had all the backups that were filling in the backdrop of the characters. So if you ever like reading the Wikipedia for these characters and wonder why, like the Angel, he had like a whole like tiny nub of a superhero career before he ever met the X-Men, and that was expanded for all of these characters. Their histories were expanded in these backups. But altogether, this was a pretty sleepy time in the X-Men franchise up until this moment here, because this is some of the earliest work. I don't know if this is the earliest work, but it's some of the earliest work for Barry Smith. He was working across the line. He was doing stuff for the horror books. He was learning as he went. And that's why I say these aren't that exciting unless you're looking back to see like how Barry Windsor Smith became Barry Windsor Smith, because they're very much Kirby clone Barry Windsor Smith. And he grew out of that really quick. He started to grow out of that in the first couple issues of Conan. But you can definitely see him learning on the page. When he starts off, he is not very good. As opposed to this guy here, Neil Adams, who had already worked by the time, I think he has all right, don't get me wrong, I was just looking at his page the other day. I think he has a couple early credits, then he goes into advertising. He stays in advertising for a few years, and by the time he comes back, basically conquers the entire industry in the space of just a couple years, becomes more or less house style at two companies very briefly. He didn't work at Marvel for long in the early 60s, but what he did was very, very influential. And, he stayed at DC, and he became the house style at DC for the entire decade, influenced everyone who came after him at that company. And the story here, and I actually just read these for the channel. So if you go and look on the YouTube, you'll see a compilation of the 80s reprints they did of the Neil Adams run on X-Men. So all this is fresh in my mind. Excellent run of books. Some of the best X-Men books ever. And you look back and you realize they were, even though this was the old team with a couple new members, because this is where Havoc joined the group, and I think Lorna Dane was in this run as well, although I don't know if she was on the team. But basically when Claremont started up, this was his blueprint, because this was, in a lot of ways, this was seen as sort of an unfinished run, because it was canceled, because the book was it had been selling so poorly. Even though they were on the book for almost a year, the sales just didn't materialize. So it got canceled even though it was selling better. But what happened after that was that because when Chris Claremont started up again, he went back and he did a Savage Land story, just like they'd done a Savage Land story with Stan and Jack. had this new villain, Sauron. He became standby for the franchise, and this is where he first appears. They have the big, in some ways, still, one of the defining Sentinel stories here. The Sentinels live, and it's the one that ends with them. They basically defeat the X-Men, and they're only defeated because basically a very old school Star Trek logic, trap. They get caught in, and they end up attacking the sun because of it. And to this day, these are some elements that they keep coming back to in sort of this configuration, because this was very similar to how Claremont picked him up as well. And they were the first people to take Magneto's helmet off, which is the craziest thing. You read back, and Roy Thomas and Neil Adams, they'll just say, like, we look back and realize Magneto never took his helmet off before, so they could have him walking around for, I think it was at least an issue, where he was just this dude walking around, and no one had ever seen Magneto before. So it wasn't until he got to the end of the issue and he put on the helmet, and they were the first people to do that. And of course, between X-Men 66, which these were the Sal Buscema took over after Neil Adams. I think he did a couple of fill-in issues here. They did reprints for 29 issues, I think. Just reprinting the early run of the book back to the very tail end of the Lee and Kirby years. And they reprint him here, not in big size, but they did do new covers for the book, so you get some nice Gil Kane, X-Men gallery here. Gil Kane inked by John Romita. Bill Everett drawing the X-Men for at least one cover. Bill Everett did more Silver Age Marvel work than you think when you look back. And then they just started reprinting the covers from the books, for most of them, for some of them. There's a Ron Wilson cover from the early 70s. And here we go, where things really get started. Giant Size X-Men #1. Excellent book. I've read it a number of times over the years. I'll probably end up reading it more times before I die. The early run, Chris Claremont starts up a co-plotter with the first couple issues here, and then Len Wein leaves, and it's Bill Mantlo does a couple issues. No, he does this one issue here, co-plotting, and then it's all Chris. He doesn't give it up, and I love this early. I love the early Dave Cockrum run. I think it's some of the, especially like this issue here where Cyclops and Havoc have a big brawl at the airport. One of the best looking issues of the X-Men ever, and I'm not as enamored with the second Cockrum run. I think it's as close to bland as the book gets, and it's through no fault of Cockrum. I think he was sort of let down by the inking on that run, and it kind of pulls the whole book down. But he had some really nice inkers, and he inked himself some for this first run. Much heavier inks. Yeah, and you see, what do? They're picking up with Magneto here. They did the first appearance of the Phoenix comes at the tail end of a big Sentinel story. And then from 107 to 108, you go from Dave Cockrum to John Byrne, and, history was made. And from there, they just go from strength to strength. If there's any comic I talk about today that you might have read, it's probably the classic era of X-Men. There's your Savage Land and your Sauron story. The first real fight between the X-Men and the new X-Men and Magneto, which, two of the members are made of metal. They struggled against him. Sunfire, everyone's favorite. Never really, and they actually gave him an extended connection to Rogue, because Rogue had his powers for a while. And no one just ever really came up with a good hook for him. And there you go, up to 122. And cross-index by characters. Characters and creators, too. No, okay. But it tells you just where all of these other characters who were part of the book, like look down here to H, the Hulk. If you want to see all the times the Hulk fought the X-Men in his own book, issue 66. That's it. I think it's a bit of a shortcoming of the Claremont run that he never gave us a real fight with the Hulk. Every team has to have a good slobber knocker with the Hulk now and again. And we never got a full battle between the X-Men, the all new, all different X-Men and the Incredible Hulk. Maybe that's the type of thing that only bugs someone like me. Probably the type of thing that only bugs someone like me. Gotham Adventures. This is June 99, so this is like the third or the fourth iteration of their Batman Adventure series, which was, the animated series tie-in, which, I didn't give a lot of credit to as first. It took me a good year or so before I started buying these books, because there was no way I was going to start off buying them, because I had been burned. I had been burned by, basically just bad animated series adaptations. And, I didn't want adaptations of episodes. Marvel did comic book annotations of episodes of the X-Men series. I only bought a couple issues of that because I saw they weren't going to change. And the first, like 4 or 5 issues of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series Archie did, I quit buying them because they were just doing animated series adaptations. And of course, the funny thing is, if you look back on it, the last issue of the Turtles I bought, the Archie Turtles I bought, was the last issue that they were doing episode adaptations. But these guys weren't doing any episode adaptations. They didn't do that. They got some of the original creators, Bruce, Tim, and Paul Dini. They did a fair amount of, very special issues and stuff. The famous Mad Love, which is, the probably defining book. It's the book that, gets picked out as, one of the exceptional, highlights for Batman of the decade. And, it's as close as we got to a full, like Harley Quinn year one, at least for that first iteration of her character. She didn't join the regular continuity until the end of the decade. It took them a while. They dragged their feet about it. They didn't do it until like 98 or 99. And of course, she's been a staple ever since. But like I said, these are these 3 characters who recurred periodically in, now I don't remember if they ever appeared in the show, because I remember they appeared in the book a few times. And it was these 3, sort of this take on the old Terrible Trio, which was just like 3 crooks in animal masks. That was their gimmick. They don't really appear much nowadays. Eddie Campbell, I think, was the last one to do a big story with them. But this was sort of like them, and it was, they were based on Mike Carlin, Denny O'Neil, and Archie Goodwin, who were the 3, veteran editor brain trust at the company at the time. And this is, of course, a pastiche of the original comic-size Mad cover. This is the same captions on it. All right, so who was this? Kelly Puckett, Rick Burchett, and Terry Beatty. They were already getting their colors from Something Digital, because they had Lee Loffridge still working, Lee Loffridge coloring, but with separations by xylanol, which I don't remember that name. Oh, Chips Deluxe with peanut butter. I don't think they sell those anymore. Man. Oh, I must be hungry. And he's fighting someone or another. Oh, there's a bedtime story. Yeah, Professor, Mastermind, Mr. Nice, which was sort of their a lot of in-jokes for people who are really know their DC staff, which, you know, maybe isn't everyone, but I'll eat this up all day. Stars and Stripe, which, you know, I bought the first, first run, I think, was only a year. So I liked that character, and then she went on to stick around because the guy who created her ended up being a mainstay of the company to this day. Not necessarily something everyone's happy about. Scooby-Doo's Greatest Mysteries. 4 most popular mysteries handpicked by Scooby fans. 109 minutes of non-stop Scooby action. There you go. So you see, this is a really nice looking Mr. Potato Head show. Oh, they must have pushed that out after the Toy Story. I don't remember that at all. That was Nightwing in his costume for the later iterations in the animated series. One of his better looks, I should say. You know, it doesn't have the collar or bust, I'm sorry. JLA Year One, Mark Waid, Brian Augustine co-writing, Barry Kitson. I like that series. That was a nice looking series. I always like Barry Kitson's work. Did a fairly lengthy run on the Superman books. It's interesting. You go here, they have this sort of special subscription ad for the books that are aimed at a slightly younger readers. So you got Animaniacs and Looney Tunes, you know, the Batman Gotham Adventures, Superman Adventures. Cartoon Network Presents, which I actually bought a couple issues of because, like, this is the series that has the only Space Ghost comics they ever made from the Coast to Coast iteration. So technically the only comics that they ever made of any of those early Adult Swim shows. You know, to my amazement, they never made an Aqua Teen Hunger Force comic books, and that should have been a no-brainer, and yet nothing, not even a whimper, ever. And that seems like a real obvious one they could have done, and they never did. Never did Brack show comics. Brack could have had a fun comic. But then they also have the 2 Legion titles at the time, Impulse and Superboy, and Scooby-Doo. So, you know, that's not so bad. Got a couple regular superhero titles that have a younger audience. Books, and you know, they still publish Looney Tunes. They still publish Scooby-Doo. As much, I think, so they have material to, you know, compile. They probably sell books. They probably, if they're smart, sell, you know, Scooby-Doo comics at Scholastic book fairs. I imagine those things being really popular in, like, you know, kindergartens. They had a whole Scooby-Doo team-up series that actually... Now I want to go back and read, because I was looking at some covers the other day. They teamed up with some fairly obscure DC characters. I remember that. King of the World. Yeah, I was starting to maybe edge out of the Superman books. I wasn't buying every special that came out. I don't remember that at all. Oh, but that was from the run where he went evil and tried to conquer the world with all sorts of Superman robots. I want to say Dominus was part of that. And the next issue is a Harley Quinn issue. All those early Harley Quinn issues, especially her first appearance. Oh man, that's a nice looking cover. Darwin Cook cover. That's why I was like, that's a nice looking cover. And then you look down and see the signature. There's a reason why that's so nice looking. Him drawing a very Kirby-esque Batman Beyond. You know, I never got a feel for Batman Beyond because I just, you know, it was a time in my life when I was sort of starting to edge away from at least, you know, where the TV shows were appointment viewing. the first 5 years with the X-Men book and the first run of Batman the Animated Series, I was there. And then, Spider-Man series, I caught up with it later on syndication. But there's still episodes from the second or the third run of the Batman animated series I haven't seen. So, something to look forward to in the future. What's next in the Oh, here's a fun one for you. Here's a fun one. The Pitt. Now, there is a sort of an ironclad law that anytime a comic book publisher starts a sub-imprint, Marvel's done this a few times, it sells well at first, or in the case of the New Universe, it never really sells that well. But you can certainly observe this pattern with the 2099 books. I was mentioning this in one of the last videos. With the Ultimatum, with the Ultimate Universe, with Ultimatum, these sub-imprints, they sell fine for a while, and then they need to goose sales. And because it's not in the regular Marvel Universe, they have a little bit more freedom. So they go, oh, well, we can really upset the apple cart. We can do something really big that, maybe sort of starts to edge the main books away from having a lot of resemblance to the real world. In the case of 2099, it was more like, we're going to get away from the stuff that worked from these books for the first couple of years, and we're just going to start playing in a completely different, dystopian, type of sci-fi than we were doing. And, with Ultimatum, it was like, well, we'll just have a huge event that causes destruction all over the universe, and the government of the United States gets, all changed up. So the books start to lose any resemblance with the real world, and it doesn't usually do a lot to hold on to readers, because at this point, you've shrunk your audience down even more to people who are on board with whatever left turn you've thrown at them, and the continuity is just getting more and more baroque. Even if, the idea at the outset had been, like with the Ultimate Universe and the New Universe, this is continuity light, but, we've been doing it for a few years, so things are just weird, and you have to know all the stuff that's happened. So, the Pitt. What does it do? Well, they needed to press the panic button, because the New Universe wasn't selling. It never sold what it should have sold, if they'd have put as much work into it as they needed to. It was kind of half-assed in some ways. There were some good books out of it, some underrated books, but it just didn't have the juice to put it over any finish lines. Some of the books didn't make it past the first year, and the books that did make it past the first year, a lot of them just switched directions entirely. The only book that really retained a solid through line through the whole line was DP7. That's because it was written by Mark Gruenwald. He had control over those characters, and there's a one story from beginning to end, and it's even interrupted. He probably could have written that book for another 100 issues, no problem. But it just had a lot of problems. And when it came time for them to stomp on the reboot button, the idea was, hey, Jim Shooter isn't working at the company anymore. We had some problems with Shooter, and the New Universe was his baby, so what are we going to do? Let's blow up Pittsburgh. So they brought in John Byrne, who'd been at DC for a couple years, and he was back at Marvel, and he did not get along well with Shooter. And when he came back, or when he was at DC, there were a couple shots taken at Shooter. And when he came back to Marvel, they were like, hey, you want to take over Shooter's book? He took over Star Brand, and he only had a few issues of it, and it just sort of went weird. He took it in a total different sci-fi direction, really, a universe away from what Jim Shooter had done, and that was kind of on purpose. But Mark Gruenwald, he was the guiding heart and soul of the New Universe. By universal acclaim, he was the only one who really cared about it. He was the one who brought it back in Quasar and did the Star Blast crossover, which was closest they got to really incorporating a lot of those elements into the Marvel Universe, until Many years later, Jonathan Hickman brought the New Universe characters back, Starbrand and Nightmask at least, without a lot of connection to the original iterations. There is an interesting story there, but no one's ever gone back to straighten out the discrepancies because they don't agree. If the Starbrand was on Earth 1 million years ago for the Avengers 1 million BC, then how was it that the first time the Starbrand ever came to Earth was in 1991? That's an interesting question. Or 92, I think. So, John Byrne, Mark Gruenwald, not names you're going to see on the same comic too often. Sal Buscema, Stan Drake. Janet Jackson color. She was a stalwart with Jim Shooter. She followed him, I think, I want to say she followed him to Valiant and Defiant as the colorist. Technical consultant, Elliot Brown. So, introduced this guy who I think he hadn't appeared before, but he was one of the superpowered guys from the New Universe, making his first appearance here. But he was sort of a dead man figure who just was transparent and watched things. So he's on hand to see the instigating event of the Pitt, which is this guy here, Ken Connell. After the first year of Starbrand, he's sick of being Starbrand, so he decides he's going to try to get rid of it. It's this magic tattoo, and he's like, well, I'm going to put this on a dumbbell and see if I can just pass this curse on to a inanimate object. And that's not something he should have done. And he thought he was being safe by flying up into the, like a mile into the sky above Pittsburgh, but it basically just created a hole in the earth where Pittsburgh had been, with all of that entailed. There's huge, the whole outskirts, everything around it just falls into this giant, vacuum vortex because there's suddenly a hole in the earth. Pittsburgh just turned into a crater 50 miles across. And as you can imagine, and one of the, I don't want to say funny, but one of the odder side effects was because Marvel Comics, the Marvel Comics who published X-Men and Spider-Man, existed in the New Universe. And supposedly, according to the issue of Starbrand, where this actually occurs, because these are the last couple pages of an issue of Starbrand that this is recapping, all of the staff from Marvel and DC were in town for the Pittsburgh Comic Con. So everyone from Marvel and DC got wiped out in the pit. Just one of those things. There's Spitfire in her armor. Everyone around Pittsburgh is just starting to freak out. Everyone just starts going after any superpowered beings they see. Because, this wasn't they figure out pretty quick, this wasn't a nuke. So this must have been one of those weird superheroes who've been popping up now for the last year or so. Spitfire trying to save who she can from whatever's left of the wreckage. She was a nice character. Sort of a take on the Iron Man archetype, where instead of like one superhero who just does it, out of their own brilliance, it's like a team out of MIT. I think it was MIT who put together the Spitfire armor. That was sort of the vibe that the New Universe had. It was stuff that you were maybe familiar with, but with a little bit of a, I don't want to say realistic, but maybe some of the stuff you take for granted in terms of comic book physics, that stuff was maybe pulled back a little tiny bit. They didn't have like magic, and that was also a common element with the first iteration of Valiant Undershooter. Is real magic didn't exist. Even Master Dark wasn't a magic character until I think later they did introduce magic after Shooter was already out of the door. And she should have been bigger because she's a redhead at Marvel, and that if anything is the ingredients for success, you know, have a head of red hair. Even if you're just like Patsy Walker, you'll stick around. People are going to keep putting you in comic books. And if you're a blonde at Marvel, you maybe need to, you know, keep your agent on speed dial there. And this is, you know, you get sort of a feel for what the new universe was about. It was maybe stories about superpowered individuals that were a little bit less sensational than, you know, the mainstream Marvel or DC stuff. And there's your Elliot R. Brown, because that's in the same font as the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. And, you know, here's just your map of, you know, it goes all the way down to almost the upper mantle of the crust, just the whole circle around where Ken Connell had been, up into the drives a big hole in the ozone layer, the stratosphere, everything up into this this circle of this. So, sorry guys, but kayfabe, you're gone. I still have a soft spot for the new universe. You will never, ever convince me otherwise. All right, how much? We've only got through a few. How much more time we got? Oh, we still got a few more minutes. What do we got here? What do we got here? Oh, here's a fun one. A little bit different. Transformers 32. And this is my copy bought off the shelf when Transformers was my absolute favorite thing in the world. And this was my favorite comic, even though it was the comic I was most excited to get, but it was also, I think I mentioned before, the comic I was always most disappointed in. I always wanted it to be better than it was, but I still loved it because it had these guys on it, and these guys were just about my favorite guys in the world. And I still like the G1 Transformers, at least the, you know, this era of G1 stuff. Whenever they go back to it, you know, Transformers has moved on. It's so many other things that whenever they just get the G1 guys back together, I think, well, who is this for? Because I feel a little dirty, like you're just pandering to me because I'm old. But, you know, the thing is this was already after when the Transformers had started to decline, because this was, you know, cover date September 87. It still ran for almost 50 issues, but this was summer 1987, and Transformers were just at the outset of their slide, because this was around the time of the Headmasters. And the Headmasters were the big push they did the year after Transformers the movie. And I like the Headmasters, and I know, you know, a lot of other people like the Headmasters, but they were already backing out of the animated series by then. They only had like a truncated 3-issue long third series with the Headmasters. And then, of course, they went and they started making more episodes in Japan, and they, in their infinite wisdom, they did not see fit to ship those episodes back to the United States, which wouldn't have probably been that difficult for them to do, but they just weren't doing it on TV anymore. So this whole period of the book here, where they're still releasing toys, you still have to reflect the new characters coming in, but the zeitgeist has passed, so to speak. The Transformers movie, you know, we underestimate at your peril. You know, it was the high water mark, but it was also the beginning of the end, because the end of Optimus Prime just drove a lot of people away. Now, you know, it broke my heart too, but I was still on board. Never did warm to Rodimus Prime, but I don't think anyone did, so. But by then, you know, Robotech was already, you know, starting to come in. They had some comic books in this time, and I think they were on TV in some areas. So, you know, people who liked giant robots, they had something that they could grow up into, so to speak. I've only recently gone back and seen any of the Japanese robot shows. There's still a lot I have to catch up with on that stuff, so I just sort of lost touch with giant robots once the Transformers went. And this is the period where Grimlock is king of the Autobots. He basically, he won it fair and square because he came in and he beat Trypticon when the rest of the Autobots really didn't have any recourse. So they made him leader, and he said, well, since you made me leader, I'm putting a crown on me and Grimlock put crown on my head, try and stop me. And the only people who really had a problem with that were Blaster and Bumblebee. So you had a long, well over a year of the book where the main Autobot faction was almost sort of played as antagonists, because these guys, they had lots of adventures on their own, and the rest of the Autobots were just sort of sitting around when Grimlock was getting more and more full of himself. And eventually there was an Autobot civil war because the headmasters came, and they came to Earth, and they realized that things were messed up. They were a completely different faction, and they eventually had a three-way brawl on the moon. I think in issue 42, there would have been 10 issues from this, which is just had all of the Transformers, all of the Autobots in it. And, the Autobots were in such disarray that the Decepticons just sort of, they were kind of on the up, and then they kept winning battles through the end of the series. Until, the Furman run, where they just straight up, the Decepticons win the war. And the only thing that really saves the day and kind of pulls the Autobots fat out of the fire is Unicron comes, and they have the chance to unite, and that's the last 2 years of the Transformers comic book. This freaked me out when I was a kid because I wasn't buying these, but the fact that this ad was upside down, it made me wonder what was going on. I'd read the ads, and I didn't understand what these products really were because I had no experience with what a role-playing game was. That's a comedic World War II game. I don't know if it was supposed to be comedic, but it's got a funny ad. And the Protector bots with the... man, I don't even remember. And I had all of them. Most of them, at least. But like I say, they were putting out enough at the time that you weren't able to buy all the Transformers. I don't think any kid was able to ever buy all the Transformers. But I remember, it was a good day when I got a Transformer, but I certainly didn't have all of them. It was, I usually got the big ones because I could put those on a Christmas list when I was 5 or 6. And, that'd be like a birthday present, like the big birthday present. Well, it would be whatever the big Transformer was. But that meant that some of the little ones maybe, only had so much allowance when I was 7. But I could follow their adventures in the comic book. And you see, Tom DeFalco has taken over. The bullpen bulletins have changed. This is the format they'd have for a few years. Checklist. Yeah, I wish they still did the checklist. Because these are actually useful. Back before the internet, this was kind of valuable information to have if you were following. Because they'd put everything in here, even if it was kind of rare. Tom DeFalco had just taken over for... I want to say, this was... Oh, no. Jim Shooter's... This is the last couple months that he was editor, because this was September 1987. What was the cover date on the Pitt? This was... Oh, it just says 1987, so it doesn't say what month. But 1987 was the last year that Jim Shooter would have had his name on a Marvel book for a long time to come. And see, this is... I like Bob Budiansky a lot. I think he did a lot with a really very merciless assignment here, because if you think about it, you're trying to have a plot, but every month you get a letter from Hasbro like, hey, this is your new character. You got to somehow write him in to your ongoing story in a way that it makes sense. So, the way I think of his Transformers and, Larry Hama's G.I. Joe, certainly it was kind of like a game of Exquisite Corpse. And that there is an element of the creative process that is completely out of the writer's hand. They're constantly getting new cards shuffled into the deck. And in hindsight, at least, I'm sure this was really maddening for the creators themselves. But in hindsight, part of the fun is looking back and seeing how they adapted, how they, how do you write a book where you have to introduce new characters every other issue? That's not really a problem that even, the Avengers or the X-Men have, where you can just like sit down and drill down on, one set of characters. It's like, no, you got to, hey, the Protectobots, you got to have them in your book. So you just got to start writing stories about Protectobots and Bruticus and Defensor for a couple pages, even though in a couple more issues, these guys will almost never appear again. But this is who they're selling this quarter. And see, this is... Blaster thinks that the Protectobots are his pals, but they're not. They weren't actually here. They fought the Combaticons. That's who they were. They fought the Combaticons because the Combaticons were here to fight. But they came to arrest Blaster. So, because he was defying the king of the Autobots. See, there were fun. This was a fun run. Even if, like I say, I was a kid. I wanted something that was as thrilling as the cartoon, but, I'm not recognizing any of the names in this letters page. Sometimes you see, and here's those striped Chips Ahoy. It just makes me wish I could go back in time and get a bag of those. That's when we were situated in comic book history. One of the big events in comic book history, at least through the 1980s. And the marriage was completely unproblematic and never gave Marvel any problems ever again. All right, so how many did we get through today? We got through, oh boy. We got through 5 comics. I'm sorry, kids. That's, we need to get through more than 5 comics for the show. But what can I say? Hopefully, you got something out of this whole exercise. Me just talking about comics for an hour of your life. So check out the rest of the channel. Check out Udder Madness, which is the sister channel where I'm putting up video annotations of my podcast with Claire Napier, which is just about me and her talking about Top Cow, so Witchblade, Darkness, all that fun stuff. We're talking about that. And I do visual annotations that I post to the YouTube here. And the newer episodes of the show are available on the Patreon. And I got a newsletter you can subscribe to, and you can get many thousands of words from me in your mailbox every episode, mostly about comic books, but also about music, and my own scribblings in the arena of fiction. I'm serializing comic book scripts on there now, so hopefully lots of fun stuff that's worth your money, especially because it's free. Check out my stuff on the Comics Journal website. Other than that, have a very nice day. Catch you later, Home Slice.